is when someone slaps someone on the back and says, go win us the game. I just think that is one of the most challenging cliches. When we build something called the Substitution Union, we actually have a number of values that the bench have to adhere to, but we have a plan for you. We have a way that we think we can utilize you. We have a process that you want to follow, so that come that 72nd minute, you are in the best position to go and help us, help you, help the team, help the fans, have the best Saturday possible.
So I recently heard a story from Golden State Warriors coach Steve Kerr. So when he was back with the Spurs, it was in 1999, after his time with the Bulls, Gregg Popovich benched him. He took him out of the starting lineup. And so he's not starting and he's pissed off. In protest, he actually refused to sit on the bench, and instead he sat on the floor next to the bench, which is pretty amazing because I consider Steve Kerr like one of the best teammates out there. He's now one of the best coaches out there, one of the best leaders. But Popovich knew that. Popovich knew he was a great teammate, and he actually pulled him aside and he says, hey, Steve, you are not that guy. One of the reasons we signed you is because we know who you are and what you can mean to the fabric of this team with your work ethic and your energy. So I love this story because it's a great story of a coach challenging an athlete in a way that instead of calling them out, it's actually calling him up. Great example of that. But there's also this side part of that story, which I think is interesting. Steve Kerr, great teammate, really good teammate, and yet he still struggles with being benched. And it's a great reminder that this isn't easy for athletes. I think as coaches, we can get so defensive, so bothered when a player doesn't respond well to us benching them. And I think the reality, though, is we as coaches, we tend to just throw them to the end of the bench and not offer a lot of support. We might offer them some words of encouragement, tell them that, hey, you still matter and you still belong here. But really, what do we do to support them? And you might be thinking, you do a lot. Well, in the next 2 episodes, we've got an expert on substitutes, bench players, or as he calls them, finishers. Sammy Lander is joining the Coaching Culture podcast to explore one of the most important and overlooked challenges in sports, preparing and empowering substitute athletes. Sammy's going to unpack the psychological journey that a non-starter endures, the critical difference between belonging and mattering, and how coaches can transform the bench from a passive waiting area into an active, purposeful role. He's going to share real-world examples from his work with professional football clubs in England, offering coaches practical tools, better language, and a whole new cultural lens for thinking about their entire squad, not just the starting team. The conversation's also going to touch on substitution strategy and return on investment, right? What is the ROI for coaches and putting in this time and effort into that? And we're going to talk about what a great sideline looks like and maybe some misconceptions around that. I highly encourage you to check out his book, Finishers, by the way. Welcome back to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nerman. I'm joined today by my co-host, Nate Sanderson. The mission of this podcast is to help you become a better leader and build a better culture. To get the notes to this and every episode of the podcast, go to tocculture.com and subscribe to the Team Culture Toolbox. You'll also get a weekly thought on leadership, culture, and coaching from me. Sammy, welcome to the podcast here. Excited to have this conversation around substitutions, reserves, and as you call them finishers here. I want to start us off with this question here today, mattering versus belonging. So what I've kind of realized is that a lot of athletes, they don't just want to belong to a team. They don't just want to feel like, people care about them. They want to matter. And the number one contributing factor that they look to as if they matter or not to the team is their playing time. So for us as coaches, what can we do other than give athletes more playing time to make them feel like they actually matter?
I think it's about giving them a process. I'll be the first person to say that I think being a substitute is rubbish, and I probably shouldn't say that because I have to try and glamorize the role and modernize it. But, the reason why I have a role, the reason why I am relevant is because there are so many subs, reserves, non-starters who have this narrative around the role of a sub that you're left out, you're not belonging, it's personal, for whatever reason. But then they don't have a process to follow. They don't have a methodology. They don't have a level of preparedness. But then come in my sport, the 72nd minute, the manager is turning around to them and looking at them as if they are the most important player in this whole process, and it's, you go from almost being sort of down here to being left out, disattached from your mates, your reality, your identity, to up here and being the most important figure in this game, with thousands of people watching. That's a major sort of emotional, I suppose, journey to go through in a very short period of time. So the way that I help players feel like they matter is by giving them a process to follow, by accounting for them, by going, we're gonna leave you out on this instance and it's for these reasons, but we have a plan for you. We have a way that we think we can utilize you. We have a process that that you want to follow, so that come that 72nd minute, you are in the best position to go and help us, help you, help the team, help the fans, have the best Saturday possible.
When is a situation where you've seen not just the performance of a player improve, but their sense of well-being, their happiness, their joy, because they had a process, even if they didn't play more?
A really nice example that I'll sort of use is we had a player who went 7 games not playing, which is very challenging. He was about 23, so he's slightly younger, which helps. We sat down, and he was quite a charismatic person. He was quite energetic. He was quite a happy individual, which was really infectious to be around. And that just started to disintegrate a little bit, sort of each day, each game week, it just started to go a little bit. And obviously that's your tell that this player is then struggling with this transition, because bearing in mind, we'd already gone through a first process to make him feel like he mattered. He's now going through another whole process where the mattering is now being questioned because he's not getting those minutes and he's following that process and not getting the reward. So we sat down really honestly and we sort of had a really nice conversation. And I think that's one of the things I always recommend, is just the way and how you communicate is so important. So we started sort of talking through different ways that not only could he carry out his own process, but could he help others carry out their process? So there's a really nice moment that springs to mind at halftime when we do our halftime sessions. He led half the substitution group. So I led one half. I led typically the striker. I had another centre back with me, and we had a centre mid. So I was leading sort of 3. We had the goalkeeper in goal. So 4 with me. He was then leading fullback himself and winger. And we had the chat, and he sort of just said to me after the game, he was like, I just feel like I've contributed. And that's that mattering again, where he sort of, I suppose, attached back to feeling like he mattered because he'd almost done the role of a coach. Now I've got to be careful, because I'm not ever saying I want that centre back to then accept that, because I still need his standards come Monday morning to be as high as every other starter, because I need him to be wanting to get in that lineup. So it's tough, because you don't ever want to glamorize it too much that you're taking away from the honour of a start or the hard work of a start. But that's a really nice example of a player who went through an initial process of building a matter, sort of maybe didn't get the initial reward. So we built sort of like another way of mattering to his collective and to his we not me, which was very rewarding, I must say.
Yeah. So I think this actually in there's a potential solution for a really common challenge that coaches face, which is there's a player that believes they should be a starter. They're not a starter. They're a reserve. How do you convince, how would you summarize, and really at its essence, how do a coach can convince a high-level athlete who sees them as themselves as a starter to embrace the mindset of a finisher and find value in that role?
I think firstly, the thing I would sort of suggest is understand your reason why. So if you are not starting a player, I'd like to think, the coaches will have enough awareness as to why they're not starting that player, whether it be mental, physical, social, technical, tactical. There will be a reason in which you are choosing A over B. What I then always, I suppose, think is a really big step in the right direction is being able to sit down with B and going, this is the reason why we are not going to play you. I think people respect people and people buy from people. And if you can sit opposite someone and be an honest human being with them, I'm not saying that they're going to turn around and go, wow, that was amazing, thanks for being so honest. But, they might flare up in that moment, which I've had instances that are like that. But come the evening, they will have more respect for you, I think, as a coach by going, listen, I don't agree with it, or I don't think this, I think that, but he's given me something. And what that sort of generates then is conversation. It then goes, well, let's just say, we don't think you're preparing yourself as well as you could do in these moments, which is why we're going to go with A. All of a sudden, not only have you given B a reason, but you've then gone, and now I want you to go and work with Sammy, who's going to address that reason, so that in 2 weeks' time, your reward, your target is to get back in that 11. I think being able to map a pathway from where they are now to where they want to be is really, really important, because I think it just involves the whole sort of goal setting principles of, an outcome, a process, a reason, an objective. And I think that is where, players are humans, just like if I'm in a situation now where one of you is trying to coach me to be a better podcaster, you need to tell me why I'm not a good podcaster to start with, and once I understand that, I can then start addressing it, and it's that principle again in life that you can sort of apply to football.
Sammy, just to be devil's advocate a little bit here and kind of push this a little bit farther, I come from high school coaching here in the States in the game of basketball, and I can think of lots of examples where this conversation with a player that's coming off the bench, they can work as hard as they possibly can. They can do everything that we ask, and the player that's in front of them is just significantly better. And I'm sure that happens at other levels too, but that's a little bit different, maybe calculus, when it really isn't a deficiency like, Sammy, you can't do X, Y, or Z right now. It's a competitive thing where the players in front are so much better. Do you approach that conversation any differently when it's like, if that kid stays eligible and doesn't get hurt, it's really going to be tough for you to break into that first group?
Yes, that's a good question. I suppose firstly, a lot more of the work I do is more first team level. So there just tends to be more cycle in selection, because it's injuries, it's fixer schedules, it's form, so there tends to be a little bit more rotation, but I absolutely get the point you're making. And I suppose I try and pick moments in which you try and relate to something. So a really good example I always use, and this works from players who are 16 and starting to 36 and have played for 500 games, is I go, what do you remember about the Bayern Munich Manchester United 1999 Champions League final? And everyone goes, Solskjaer came off the bench and won. And you go, like, that's what you remember. You don't remember who started. You don't remember many minutes that person played. You remember that someone came off the bench for 11 minutes, 12 minutes, and won the game. And that's what Solskjaer's role was that in that moment. And there are plenty of other moments that I can choose, more modern ones, different sports, different ways. But picking moments like that is going, like, I might need you to be a Solskjaer for the next 5 games. I think the way you frame it is obviously really, really important. I think I like basketball a lot. I learn a lot from their culture, and I think they get substitutes better. They do it better than football, because I think they get it right from minute one. So I spoke to a few teams, this is more in the UK than it is the US, but they sign players with a role in mind, and they sell that role to the player. So the player comes in that first day and they go, you're not going to play more than 15 minutes a game. Like, that's going to be your role, because we've got this guy who we're paying this much for, and at the moment his stats are off the chart. So, unless you can genuinely come in and convince me otherwise, this guy's going to play. But you're going to play 15 minutes when this guy needs a rest. And in 2 years' time, when he moves on, when he gets injured, when he retires, when he declines, then it's going to be your moment. And I think when you map it out like that, players instantly go, well, first of all, if he don't want that, he won't sign. If he thinks or she wants, I want more than 15 minutes, they just won't sign. If they do sign, they're coming in with complete clarity around what their role looks like in the squad. And I think that's why football sometimes is chasing their tails, because football sometimes signs 24 stars. And then you're going, right, that's a dynamic that's going to be really challenging to manage, which is why so many people don't enjoy not playing, because they're probably under the principle that they were promised to play.
Okay, a quick pause. If you're getting value from the conversation, I just want you to know about the TOC coach community. It's free to join, jump in, connect with some other coaches, start learning. Here's the thing though, if you're the kind of coach who wants to go deeper, who's really committed to transformation, not just doing enough to get by, Premium Access gives you everything, all 12 courses, every live training, my office hours that I host multiple times a week for 30 minutes where you can just pop in, ask me a question. You're going to get the personalized consulting for your team when you need it. You also get one of my favorite courses for coaches, which is the Playing Time System course. It's an incredible way to develop a systematic way within your team to determine, communicate, and support players in their role on your team. It eliminates playing time issues that create headaches and kill culture. It's for coaches who don't just want to be good, right? They want to be the kind of leader that their athletes look back and say, that was the best team experience I've ever been part of, regardless of their role on the team. Now, if that's you, go on over to tocculture.com where you can join the TOC coach community. We look forward to seeing you inside. I don't think all basketball coaches do a good job of clarifying it from minute one. I think that's great encouragement, though. And I think a lot of coaches are afraid of being really clear up front because they don't want players to feel like they weren't given a chance. And yet so often most coaches or many coaches have made up their mind. My question for you is, what's something a coach says or does that you've seen, observed, that makes you cringe and go, oh my gosh, you're making this so hard for me to do this work to help these substitutions, to help these reserves to play at their best, to feel connected to the group. Yeah. So what are some things coaches say or do that make things really difficult?
There's two things. One in game, one out of game. So just to play both sides. The one in game is when someone slaps someone on the back and says, go win us the game. I just think that is one of the most challenging cliches that exist at the moment. If I lined up 10 players that I've worked with and said, give me the definition of what go win the game means, it'd be different every single time. And it's also why, we see players come off the bench and do like some crazy stuff because in their head, they think that's how they're going to win the game. Win the game might be, I need you to go on, join two banks of four and just shuffle for 15 minutes and make sure they don't have a shot on target. And that's won us the game. I think what helps there is more detail, is more coaching, more alignment, more language, more direction. So that's the first thing. The second
Let me jump in here real quick, actually, just because what I heard there is like a coach, whether it's go win us the game or just a lack of clarity on what's needed from them. And then players think, I got to go win the team the game, or they heard that, or they just, they think they heard that, or even the player that's like, I got to go earn my starting spot. And they go try to go play like a starter. Yeah. And that's not what's needed out of them. They need to be played to their strengths, and they're not going to be able to do the things that the starter can do. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that, I think, because I know some coaches are going, well, I've never said that, but I'm like, we have been unclear about what we needed from them. So I'll let you go ahead with your second one, though.
The other one that's more off the pitch that I think I see not managers do, I think it's probably more that I've seen on TV than managers I've worked with personally, but just the narrative that you build around a substitute and the language you use to describe it. So I was listening to a podcast and it was a really, really good podcast. I'll try and remember what it is, but a podcast followed him throughout the season and we're just like following all of his chats. And some of his chats were how he would sort of let players know they weren't starting. And one was in his office. He had two sort of non-starters opposite him. And he would say, you're going to be on the bench. So, get your bench coats on, keep warm, have your jelly babies. And then come the 60th minute, we'll cross that bridge. And I just think you've planted such a level of low performance or like comfortability around that role of a sub. Like you've almost like dressed it down. You've almost made it not sound as sexy as it can sound. Now I think when you do that, the perception that you're then giving to the player is that they're probably not important or they're probably not going to be valued for the first 45 minutes of a game because you've just said to them, go and relax, go do your thing, go get comfortable, go be in your bench coach. You'd never say that to a starter. I'd like to think you'd never say that to a starter, but for some reason you say that to subs and it's almost like acceptable. And I just think that, the language that a manager can use around subs, the way you build it up, the way you address it, even people's tones. Sometimes people go, oh, and you're going to be a sub, and it's almost that like initially like, I've got to feel sorry for you. Whereas like there's probably a way of, I think there is a way of delivering that message where it's done powerfully and it's done with empowering the person and going, you are going to be a sub, but this is what I'm going to want from you come this moment. You're delivering the same message, just doing it in two completely different ways.
Well, Sammy, I want to follow up on that a little bit and also drill down for a second here, because when I first started digging into your bio, you come across as kind of being known as the substitution coach. And coming from basketball background, I thought, oh, that means this guy determines like the best time to send players in and out of the game. But that's not really what you're decision-making purview is. It's more, how do we prepare substitutes to be as successful as possible in the game? And as you kind of talked about a little bit already, I guess what I'm curious about here is, why is there a niche for someone like you in the sporting world? In other words, what is it that head coaches either neglect or we don't understand about kind of the role of the substitute that has created an opportunity for you to really specialize in this role?
No, it's a great question. And like I said, I think picking up on the first part of that, I think I divide my role into two. I think I've got what I call player methodology or substitution methodology, which is where I go and I work with those players. It's a very people-driven process around how we can make them as best finishers as they can be. But there is the flip side of that almost once we've done that side of things, we then flip it, and then it's about substitution strategy. So we do touch on how, who, where, when, and whys of making substitutions. Because when I started this chat, or this whole sort of idea, I sat down with coaches and managers like yourselves and just said, talk to me about subbing. And the consistent in football was that managers felt like they subbed with a hope, or that there was just like a gut feeling. That to me is like, wow, like there must be something we can do that's more deliberate. I love that word. We must be like more deliberate with the way that we are substituting. So that sort of, I suppose, answers a couple of sides of that question. But the other side, is that players told me they struggled with it. Managers told me they struggled with it. When you combine those two things, and then you think, what does that do for a team's chances of winning? What does that do for a player's ability to perform? What does that do for a team's culture? What does that do for the sustainability of a life of a manager? All of these questions then sort of like have a knock-on effect from, if you're doing this part of the game maybe not as productively as you could, what are going to be the detriments to that? And every presentation I go into, the best way that I sell myself is return on investment. You go, if you pay me this, I'm going to deliver this. And, I'm still yet to find a situation in which my offering does not sort of align or exceed the return on what you're going to get given.
Yeah. And I guess I wonder, is there a deeper cultural element that has to change within an organization or a team around the concept of the sub? It's not just, it is the individual has to look at their role differently, but the manager also has to look at the role of the substitute and the amount of attention and energy that's required to prepare them to finish a game or to make the appropriate contribution. And I would imagine that it goes even beyond that within an organization, that collectively there has to be a different view. And so what is that? Like, what is the cultural piece of that really makes the return of investment that you're talking about possible?
Yeah, I think two things that I want to bring up there. The first is, I listened to a great podcast that said, if you want to understand a company's culture, go and ask the intern. Don't let the CEO like bring you around the right parts. Don't go and talk to the high performers that seem to bill every month or whatever business you're in. Go and ask the intern. Go and ask the so-called least important person in the building, and they will tell you what the culture is like. What do your substitutes say about you? What do your substitutes say about the culture? Because all of the interviews that I sort of conducted when I started this role was that players felt that being a sub was rubbish, that it was very uninclusive, that it was quite personal, that it wasn't a lot of rationale around why, that there was not a lot of process, all these negatives. And you think, what does that then do, flipping it again back onto a manager's chance of surviving in a job for longer than a season? If he's got 10 players that feel like that, what does that do for a manager's chance of winning, of surviving, of thriving, and all these sorts of, again, knock-on questions? What is that? That's the side of the return on investment that I think is so important, and arguably more important for the sustainability of a culture. Obviously, the goals are important because that's what's going to win you games, buy you time, and put you in the right places for trophies. But, ultimately having players that are all pulling in the right direction is going to last longer. So they are the types of return on investment that I demonstrate to managers, to say, not only is it great on the pitch, but if we can get it off the pitch as well, it's gonna help you be more cohesive. And we not me. I always use we not me. Ultimately, we need to be a collective, and we need to be pulling in the right direction. If we've got four that are going the opposite way, it's going to slow us down.
In the States, I imagine if you polled coaches, whether it's soccer, basketball, ice hockey, football, lacrosse, across the board, what they think a good sideline looks like, they would say something along the lines of there's cheering, they're waving towels, they're rah-rah on their team, or they're really locked in. They know what's going on. They know the time. They know the score. Maybe they're even shouting out encouragements to their teammates. What do you think a great sideline looks like?
This is such a good question. So we did a workshop around this in one of the clubs I was at recently. I think I touched on it in my book, actually, where I generated the idea from there. We used to take pictures of our bench. Talk to me about what you look like. Talk to me about what words you associate with this picture. Talk to me about what you think fans think when they look at you. Talk to me about what you think the opposition players are thinking when they look at you. It's all about awareness, I think, in this moment, because I don't want to tell someone to be happy, then be happy and just be happy for the sake of being happy. I want them to want it. When we build something called the Substitution Union, we actually have a number of values that the bench have to adhere to in order to represent the Substitution Union. So the 3 things that they said were positive, proactive, and I think it was prepared, I think was the 3rd one. But I'll go positive and proactive because I can remember those for sure. So every time we take the picture, I had the right, and we would agree that I had the right to then call them in and say, do you think you look positive and do you think you look proactive? And if they didn't, there would be a conversation potentially around why they weren't in that moment. Now, obviously, if I had done my job correctly up until that moment, I'd like to think I would have addressed it beforehand, but there are moments in which players might have gone, yeah, like that probably wasn't as positive as I could be if my teammate was looking over, or if the gaffer looks at me and needs confidence, I probably wasn't as proactive as I should have been in that moment. And, each club I go into, I always let the players decide the union values, and it's just my job to bring them to light when I think it's necessary. So I think, in response to your question, what do I think a good sideline looks like? I think they represent the values that they want to project into the game, the team, the culture, the manager.
All right, that's it for part 1 of our conversation with Sammy Lander. Going back to one of the things that really stuck out with me was how important it is for us to work with the team to define the values and behaviors for how we want to show up as substitutes. I think that's huge. I think it drives awareness and ownership rather than us telling them how they should be. On top of that, I think we have a deep responsibility as coaches to help players feel they matter in their role, not just belong. We can't just say it to them, or we can't just think that it's obvious. We have to work with the players and all the coaches to make sure that people see the value in their role as a substitute. Next episode, we're going to be unpacking how to support athletes better within their role, some more practical tools and strategies. You're not going to want to miss it, so be sure to be a subscriber to the podcast so you never miss an episode of the Coaching Culture Podcast, as well as leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts if you find this podcast valuable. Thanks for listening in.